record to this computer. Okay. Well, hi, everybody. I'm John Henshaw, and I'm here with Matt Willig. And Matt, you graduated in 07?
Correct, 07.
And what, you were a history major, you were history communications or history?
I was a straight history major.
Okay. And bring us back to the glorious days of the spring, in the spring, May of 07. I think the job market was doing one of its like nosedives and tanking pretty hard at that point.
Yeah, that was one of the like mini recession periods, I think they would qualify it as now. So the job market was not strong, and I was facing a scenario where most times when I was applying because of the recession market, I was a college grad going against people with 5 years, 10 years, 15 years experience who were out of jobs, also looking for similar positions. So I would lose those positions consistently because unless someone wanted the cheaper early graduate alternative, they always wanted someone who could step right in and do the work and had experience compared to myself, who did not have that sort of same wealth of experience.
So what did you end up doing?
So when I got out, I started in a basic sort of general office position for the first couple months, just to get in somewhere and to get benefits, insurance benefits, some amount of salary. They all were pretty important now that I was completely out of school on my own. So I started in that role and then was able to sort of take advantage of that initial entry into a company and work with some of the other departments and show that I had some general thinking ability and skill and could get myself into a low-level analyst position in that company. So I took a business analyst position is what they referred to it as. And so that position set me up to straddle between programmers who were doing the final work in IT and the business people who were doing the day-to-day work. And so the analyst was there as someone who would learn and understand what the business was doing in their process, and then work to help translate the concepts of what they were doing and what they wanted new or different to the understanding of what the programmer was going to be asked to accomplish.
Okay. So you worked for an insurance company, or you still work for an insurance company, right?
Yeah, so I started with a life insurance company, and so I'm still in that industry. Now I'm in a life insurance division under a large national bank. So I work in that sector, but for them overall as the parent company.
Okay.
And I transitioned. So I started as business analyst, but I had a previous background before my history major. I spent time as a computer science major for about a year and a half. And so based on having some previous programming skill, they asked me to do a couple of extra little programming projects during my analyst work, and that converted into, can you do a little more? Can you do a little more? And then they turned me into a developer entirely. And then I just have continued on that career path there as a developer since.
Okay. So what part, like how much of your background as a history major do you use in your job?
So I actually think I use a lot. I think a lot of people would say that's crazy and like you're writing code for programs, but the biggest element of my career as a developer is being able to take something I don't understand as a larger process or a way that people are going to do work or how something is going to function, and learn it and understand it and then see where it could go in the future, and then be able to talk to other people about that and to talk about how a program might work within that larger system. And so most of what my real work is analysis and understanding. And I think the history major that was a lot of what I was doing through all my classes was, read all of these papers, read, understand, you know, the, the first person history that Frederick Douglass wrote about his situation, and then apply that to the larger context of what was happening in the world, and then, complete X amount of papers and relay your understanding and create another understanding on top of that. That is what I am doing so often now in my work is, okay, here's a program or a process, understand it, then also be able to adapt it or make it, improve it or make it better, or come up with a different way of looking at it to also improve what's happening. And so I think that that skill set is a large part of what I use day to day.
That's cool. So are you, the people you work with, do you see a difference between people who are trained to be writers or analytical writers and people who are, I don't know, business majors or computer science majors or, I don't know, more of a technical field?
Yeah, so there's a huge difference. So I work with some brilliant people who are wonderful coders. They can't talk in a meeting to save their lives, and so they're often left out of meetings and other people go in their places, or I will often be referred to by other people to say, hey, we need you to come help us understand what Scott is saying about his program, because we can't we can't understand what he's saying, and we need you to break it down for us. Um, so
I'm
there
sorry.
is a real, yeah, that's true. It draws a lot of laughter within the team as well. And so um, there is a real language and both in verbal and written communication gap for the extremely technical people. And so I've been able to get ahead and move ahead in my field largely because I can go and I can sit with the business people and I can talk with them in a meeting and I can help explain and move projects forward, where other people who are doing the same things as me can't do that, or they will often derail meetings because they want to talk about code because they really love writing code and it's their whole thing. And so they get lost in one little part of how a program works instead of the larger meeting context.
Wow. That's a whole other world. Although I thought you were going to say they would derail meetings because they don't want to talk about this. And then which would be more my world, not yours. You know, like basically people just I don't really like what you're saying, so I'm just going to see if I can stop it by just making it aversive. And then we'll meet again next week and then I'll do it again. I can do
There's a
this for
lot of that
six
too.
months. Yeah.
There's a lot of developers who also don't have not having not talked with a lot of people, don't have the same sort of business tact that they will have learned over time that I might have learned. And so they will come to a meeting and say, no, that idea is stupid. I don't want to do that, which you can do that as a developer and you can get away with it, but then also your manager will then have to cover up for you and like not invite you back to meetings, and you'll be talked to about how you can't do that when you're in a meeting with the business. You can do it in our little world, but don't take it to them. And so it becomes a whole thing.
So I'm sorry, that is just never ceases to amaze me when you talk about that. I mean, I've heard that from other people. I have friends of mine who, God, they started working at Ma Bell back when Ma Bell existed. And then they worked to work for, whatever the spinoff from Ma Bell was that then became Verizon. And they've gone through, like by now, when they were starting out, they were 22 maybe. And now they're like retired. So they're 58. So they worked at a company for, 35 years, and there were probably 20 or 25 downsizing exercises at that
Yeah.
company and all that space of time. And they'd keep looking around and somebody'd say, Bill, why are you still here, man? You've not only survived, you've done okay. And everybody else was downsized. And he goes, well, I can write. I'm like the only guy that anybody knows who could just write a coherent memo, So I don't know if that's still true, I guess.
Yeah, I think I think it's shockingly true. I think we have an expectation that like, well, by now we've gotten past that. Like there's so many people with, undergrad degrees and other things and fields that like clearly they can do this, but there's still a lot of overall debt in that area where people can't or don't want to do those type of things. So they actively avoid them or refuse them. And so if you have those skills and are willing to operate them, it can definitely be to your advantage.
Okay, that's good to hear. So what advice do you have for students, either like like a lot of the students in this are in year 1 or 2? So what things, if you were to go back, or if you were to give advice, and you are giving advice to students kind of early in their career, what kinds of things would make them, like what things is it worth worrying about in terms of the job market? And what things, or is it worth just focusing on being a student, being good in your classes? So how do you kind of, what are things you do to prepare yourself for the future that are within your control that early on?
So I think for me, it's learning certain base skill sets strongly. Like when I talk about my history degree really helped me to learn how to analyze, how to write, how to put together thoughts and do those kind of things. That's a learn through the classes. And same way that a major in another area a coder might learn particular skill sets that make them great at coding through a lot of classes. Take advantage of learning that skill set and get really good at that skill set and understand what you personally are good at to
Mhm.
help market yourself in the future. So it's kind of understanding what things you have a skill in and what things interest you as a skill, and then leveraging that and pushing on that to help define that for your future. And then also keeping yourself open to other ideas of who you're going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. I always felt like when I was back in that model, it was a pipeline of, okay, I'm getting out of high school, I'm getting into college, and I've got to go on to do this major, and that major tracks to X, and it's specific what that tracks to. And I think what you learn as you get farther out is that that major for some people will not be what they do at all. I have business majors, I have high school grads only in my field. I have all kinds of people who come into, the area I'm working in that don't have a specific IT background in the first place. And
Mhm.
then I think that applies to everything, is just be prepared and be open in what your thought process is. And so if that means taking some courses that branch into other areas to see whether you hate something or like something, I think that can be really useful. Like you can think off the top, God, I would never be a programmer. I would never do any sort of coding. That's not me. It's too hard. I don't why would I do that? Or I don't like it, or that's for people of a certain type. But you can always at least take one class and see what it's like, or take one science-based class and understand, because even though you wouldn't potentially become a scientist because you don't have biology degree or chemistry degree, there's still a lot of range where those people working in that field may need people of other skill sets working alongside them. And so branching out and understanding that just because you're getting a history degree doesn't mean, okay, well, that means I've got to go on and be a professor, or I've got to go on and teach high school, or I've got to do specific research based things with it. There's a lot of open space in the world for getting that history degree and taking the skills that you learn by working in it and applying it to a totally different field or a totally different area of the world.
Yeah, I almost nobody that I have as an advisee takes me up on it, but I always say you should take a class in business, take a class in stats, take a class in either computer science or sciences, because a little bit will take you a long way. Like then that allows you, if you're getting hired, and I remember you were the one who taught me this, if you have a programming class, that gives you a second look by a company that otherwise will say, no, why should we can't train you. But if you can say, no, I can't do everything, but I had a class and I got a, I did well in it. I know how to do it in, whatever this language is. And then they say, oh, okay. It opens a door. Whereas if you basically don't have any of those things, there's a series of it forecloses on opportunities that otherwise you might have. And I think as at 18 or 19, that isn't as bothersome. But when you get to when you become older and you want to basically branch out, it's just harder to make those lateral moves, the fewer skills you have in your toolkit. So
Yeah.
like now I'm learning Spanish because it's something I started when I was young and I kept thinking, oh, I'll get to it later. But now, just both for my research interests and my, what the places I want to go and where I want to be, I'm learning Spanish. It would have obviously been so much easier to have done this when I was younger. But you can come back from it, but it's just a little bit harder. So, at least I have my job and that's pretty stable. So most people don't have that opportunity. It's harder if you're really scrambling.
Yeah, well, and it's, if you learn at 18, 19 to take up a small bit of another skill or another idea, I think it's going to help you to be a little more open to it throughout your career as you go forward, because there's going to be lots of times and opportunities where you have to learn something new, whether it's within your field specifically, or if it's related to your field or something else. I don't think the notion of learning is going to stop just because you have graduated and you have your degree. And sometimes there's a real hope as you go through high school and into college of like, I really just don't want to have to learn anymore. I'm so tired of like someone else telling me, learn this other thing, learn this thing. I just want to work and like have some time where it's not another thing I've got to learn. And you will get that space for a period of time, but you have to, I think, be open to the process of you're going to have to learn some other things along the way and pick more things up. So if you feel comfortable with it now, it's going to be easier later.
I love that. I love that idea. So you also probably at this point you're managing people, or you managing, like, how many people are you in charge of, or how many people are on your crew?
Yeah, so I'm considered a senior software engineer at this point. So in the team, I will lead teams of 4 to 8 people on a project, depending on the situation. Um, I've passed up direct management opportunities within my company a few times, not because I'm averse to it, but because the situation in those specific management jobs, they're set up by hierarchy to probably fail or not be able to do what you want to do based on the management chain. So that's just analysis there, but I can go elsewhere and do it. So in day to day, I'm definitely leading multiple people on projects, and I'm the person that other people come to for, what do I do on this? How do we do this? What's our preferred process for this kind of thing?
Oh, that's pretty cool. That's very cool. So I guess where I was going with this was trying to, when you see people who are brand new to the corporate work world, or at least the banking work world, what kind of either attributes or perspectives or skills do they have that help them succeed, and what things do people come in with that are that kind of they limit themselves by doing, like, that they may not realize that they're sabotaging themselves maybe?
Yeah, so pretty good example is we had a person who joined our team about 2 years ago, and one of his like key failures was that if you gave him something to work on, he would not put out what we considered the normal effort, extra effort, which was that if I give you a project and then say, okay, I need you to go work on this, he would come back to us continually for every step and say, well, what do I do now? Well, what do I do now? Well, what do I do now? Well, how do you do that? And so what would happen is that we would have to sit there and then coach him through each step and coach him through this. And when someone is brand new, you're willing to do that for a certain period of time. He had a little bit of experience, like 2 years in, but he did not have that exploring nature of, I'm going to attempt something. And so we always look for, if I give you something, come back to me and say, I tried these three
Right.
things. I now know that this other stuff happens, or this thing, or I know that this won't work. What do you recommend? And anyone in my field will tell you that's all we're looking for, is that you will make an effort and will attempt some things and try some new things and try to understand on your own first before coming to us for like, well, what is the answer? And so if you can step into any job, and if someone gives you something to work on, make a solid effort at it. And if you come up short, and if you don't understand, or there's a problem, most people aren't going to, do the movie script thing, which is berate you and tell you how stupid you are and you're clearly not cut out for this job. They're going to say, okay, and they're going to work with you. And it's something that a friend of mine referred to as like a general of getting things done, which is that like you had this general degree of knowing how to advance a problem. And so if you can advance whatever the issue is to a solution, that's considered extremely valuable. And it's the thing that I have seen be the most limiting factor for people, is that they don't attempt to do that extra work or to come with solutions. They only come to you for what's the answer, instead of what solutions they've tried or what they might want to do next.
Right. Yeah, that's a good, yeah, I think that's actually true with being an undergraduate as well. Is sometimes people just like, I don't know what to do. It's like, well, what have you done? And
Yeah,
if you're repairing a car, or if you're like rewiring, a burned out circuit or something, like you basically, a lot of it is you just, well, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. And eventually you find out, I've tried all the obvious things, so it must be something, at that point, I'll call an electrician and say, hey man, I clearly am not getting this right. And then usually they're like, oh yeah, no, here it is. But I can tell them all the things that I've done. I know it's not that. I've replaced, and so you end up lots of dead ends. That's what a lot of research is, at least what I discovered in graduate school is, you think this should be right, and you go and you look at it, and then you're like, yeah, no, it's not there. There's no sources there. Or that could be true, but I don't know. I can't make that argument because I have no evidence to make that argument. And so, but then along the way, what you're realizing or what you're figuring out is here are kind of ways you become better at finding the cheese on the next time you go out, or you find your way through the maze quicker, whatever metaphor you want to use.
yeah. I mean, I've always heard it as like your barrier to entry is too high. It's the thing where like you're given a project and it's to write a particular paper, and you're like, I don't know what to write. I don't know what to write. And so your option is to never write it, and then have the problem of like, well, you failed because you never wrote. But if you make an attempt and it's the wrong attempt, and you say like, look, I put this together, it's the wrong attempt, I'm trying to find the next attempt, I think you at least get some amount of credit in the
Yes.
school-based world. And then in turn, it's the same thing out in the real world. You've at least made a try at it. So people are more willing to work with you and to help you find the next path if you're struggling to find the next path, but you've at least tried to come up with something.
Right. Oh, I think that's definitely true. I will sometimes say that more to parents than to students, because usually the parents are like, this class costs this much money. I don't know why my kid got X grade. And I'm like, they're learning, and failure is part of learning. And so sometimes you fail, you cheat, and then you get caught. And I think lots of times students cheat and don't get caught. But when they do, then that's a costly thing. But at least they figure something out. And it's not a criminal act. You didn't embezzle from your company and get caught, which guarantee that will get you more consequence than, basically not citing appropriately and using Wikipedia in a stupid way, or claiming you read foreign an article from Foreign Affairs. That's my personal favorite. Like, you've never read anything else in this class, as far as I could tell, but you're now reading Foreign Affairs to do research. Like, no, I don't think so. I mean, I wish, but no. Yeah, so I think that's a good perspective, that approach doesn't stop. It's not like you go out. I think, anyway, I think we're more averse to failure now for a whole variety of reasons than, like, we see that as a personality flaw rather than just part of the process.
Yeah, it's the you know, the attempt to be great is the enemy of good, right? And so great is the enemy of good. If you're only going to do things because you know you can be great at them, well, then that's going to be a severe limitation. And so you've got to be prepared to, like, try a thing and maybe come up a little bit short on, you know, the first version,
Right.
the first thing. And but like, that continual effort can lead you to get to good. It doesn't have to be to be great. You don't have to be great out
Right.
the gate. And so I think it's one of the things that you learn as you get out in the working world is there's a lot of people who aren't great. And so if you feel like you have to come out and be great at a thing, or you can't do it at all, that's really not the case. And so you've got to be open to that mindset of, like, just try to be good at something, and then, like, it'll grow and it can get better. And
Right.
so in that path.
Yeah, Lincoln failed at most of the things he did. I mean, he was by lots of, I mean, he argued cases like in front of this, I can't remember, I think he argued cases in front of the Supreme Court, or at least at federal court. And in a couple of cases, he was arguing like patent stuff. And I think it was like, I can't remember, maybe it was like Seward was the lawyer who argued against him, just ripped him apart in the courtroom, like totally. He lost the case and he went home, and he basically learned from it. He didn't say, like, I failed. He studied why the other guy's argument was better. And then eventually some of those guys ended up working for him. Like, everybody who Lincoln had in his cabinet, they were usually united by a couple of things. And one is that they all thought they were smarter than Lincoln. And they were all usually people who were leaders who were really good. And he surrounded himself by people who were great, who challenged him. And the really smart ones would figure out by the end of his presidency, like, oh yeah, no, this guy's much smarter than I am. Like, he's figured something out that nobody else did, because he cracked the code of how to build a political coalition that stuck together in the middle of the Civil War, which is not easy. So anyway,
Yeah.
but lots of failure and willingness to learn from that. So any other points of wisdom, things that people shouldn't do, or things that people should do?
Yeah, so I've been on interview committees over time, and so I have been involved in the interview process. And I think when I'm interviewing candidates for any job, I see your grade point averages, I see like what you did and stuff, but we don't pay as much attention to that. That comes into importance in certain fields. There are some fields that really do pay attention to your grade point average and what you did. But in our world, we don't often pay attention to that kind of thing. I'm always interviewing you for what your ability to think is. And so I'm not going to ask you questions that are specific to coding or specific to how you would business analyze. And I'm not going to ask you specific technical jargon in any of your fields. I'm going to ask you, normal everyday problems, and like, how would you go through, and like, how would you exist in that situation, and what would you do? What's your process for getting through that? Because in the end, so much of what a lot of jobs are is like, can you think your way through something? How do you get through the maze? Going back to your cheese references, how do you get yourself through the maze that is this problem? And if your answer to me is like, well, I don't know, I'd ask someone. Well, okay, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for someone who can, talk me through the process. And even if your process isn't the perfect version, that's okay. I just want to hear that you can think through and you can get yourself to some
Mm.
steps and can do certain things. And so I'm always looking for that in interviews, is just that cognitive ability to, you know, exist in a state of a, or an issue, and work through stuff and show me that you can think about it in a meaningful way.
Yeah, that's funny. I always got the impression and this is why I was always so terrible at interviews, that people learn, like, you're supposed to learn rote phrases. Like, where do you want to be in 5 years? What's your biggest weakness? You know, oh, I'm just such a perfectionist. Like if you learn the right phrase, then you'll for sure get hired. And it's never been on the committees that I've been on, although occasionally sometimes people do just throw out buzzwords. I think in management positions, that seems to be what everybody gets all excited. Ooh, I've heard of that. That's the flavor of the month. Let's go that way.
Okay.
But that's academics. So
Yeah, and there definitely is some of that in the larger business industry and world. There are going to be people who look for keywords and phrases, right? And they're going to ask you basic conceptual stuff. But the reality is that being able to just have a real conversation and to express yourself in reasonable ways is going to get you a lot farther than any of the like rote sort of things, unless it's a very specific job or field. And like,
mhm.
that's been my overall experience in a lot of interviews, is we like the candidate who's interesting and who's friendly and easygoing, because in the end we'll take someone who is less skilled, or we'll take someone who is not the best at a particular thing if we think that they're going to fit in well with the larger group. And so you can be the best candidate and still lose an interview because that other person seemed like way more interesting and fun to be around, and like, we're going to have to work together a lot. So if you're a complete jerk in your interview, or you just come in telling me that you're the best person to ever do this thing, okay, great. But if I have to listen to that for 5 years, that's going to drive me nuts. So we'll just pass.
Fair point.
And it can be that selfish and that simplistic sometimes. So, you know, it is not as daunting as it may seem sometimes as you
Right.
head out there in the field.
Well, that's good to know. Anything else?
Um, I think those are like key things I would say, you know, just
No, that's good.
look for different ways to diversify and understand more things and be open-minded.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you for your time. And I'm going to stop